The sound of the wrought iron gate clanking shut sent a definitive echo across the entrance of the Whispering Pines Estates subdivision in Alpharetta, Georgia. The air was cool, signaling the end of a long, humid day, and the sky was a bruised mix of gold and purple as the sun dipped. Cars rolled past on the busy main road, their headlights flicking on, but at the gate itself, two strangers were locked in a tense standoff. "Excuse me, sir. Excuse me." The voice of Mr. Wallace Thompson cut through the evening air. At 65, he moved with the brisk, assured step of a man who was accustomed to being instantly obeyed. His hair was meticulously combed, and his Homeowners Association badge was clipped to his polo shirt as if it were a shield of law enforcement authority. The woman he was calling after had her hand on the key fob of her sedan, about to scan her way through the gate. She turned, her expression calm but visibly exhausted from her day. This was Eleanor "Ellie" Vance, 42, a white software architect and a homeowner in Whispering Pines for 7 years. Her laptop bag hung heavily at her side, her sleeves pushed up from hours spent at her desk. "Yes?" Ellie asked, her voice even, her eyes steady. Wallace walked quickly toward her, gesturing with a dismissive wave. "Be a gentleman and open that gate for me. I left my card at home." Ellie looked at him for a moment, then back at the security panel. "I can't do that, sir. Homeowners Association rules state we aren't supposed to let anyone in without a card or security clearance. You'll need to call the guard station." Wallace blinked, his face tightening as if she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Excuse me? I live here. I've been on the board for 15 years. Are you seriously going to stand there and not let me in?" Ellie shifted her bag to the other shoulder, her patience firm. "Rules apply to everyone. I'm not risking a fine because someone doesn't have their card. Security will let you in if you give them your address." His face flushed a deep red. The sheer audacity, he thought, to be denied entry to his own neighborhood by this woman. "You are being difficult," he snapped. "You don't get to decide who lives here." Ellie tilted her head slightly, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "I don't. That's exactly why I'm telling you to call the number posted right there on the gate. It's not personal. It's a procedure." Wallace's lips pressed into a thin, furious line. To him, this was no longer about a gate. It was about being challenged. He wasn't used to being told no, and certainly not by a resident he had already judged as beneath him. "I am not going to stand here and argue with you," he declared, pulling his phone from his pocket. "If you won't let me in, I'll call the police. Let them sort it out." Ellie let out a short, skeptical breath that was almost a laugh, but more a sound of utter disbelief. "You're really going to call 911 because I followed the rules?" He didn't answer. His thumb was already dialing. Ellie shook her head slowly. She had seen enough news stories, read enough accounts, to know exactly how this was about to escalate. Yet, here it was, happening to her, on the street where she paid taxes, homeowners association fees, and even adhered to the strictly enforced landscaping guidelines. Wallace stepped a few paces away, his voice rising sharply as the dispatcher picked up the line. "Yes, I need an officer at the entrance of Whispering Pines Estates. There's a woman here, white female, mid-40s maybe. She's blocking me from entering my own neighborhood. She's acting suspicious." Ellie froze, a sudden, bitter recognition washing over her. She had been instantly reduced to a suspicious woman, in the very place she called home. "Unbelievable," she muttered, rubbing her forehead. Inside the dispatch center on the other side of town, fluorescent lights glared over rows of operators fielding emergency calls. One of them was David Vance, 44, headset snug over his ears, a pen poised over his notepad. David was a veteran dispatcher, calm and steady. He had just finished handling a call about a brush fire when the line connected. 911, what is your emergency?" David's voice was professional. Wallace's complaint spilled into David's ear, a torrent of details, accusations, and half-truths. David's pen scribbled notes, but his brow furrowed the moment he heard the description. "White female, mid-40s, refusing to let me in." Then the address, Whispering Pines Estates. David sat bolt upright. His pulse picked up. That was where he lived. And mid-40s, white female. He leaned forward, straining against the noise of the call center. "Ma'am, you're saying there's a person preventing you from entering your neighborhood? Can you describe her again?" Wallace huffed. "Tall, dressed professionally, has a laptop bag. She's standing there like she owns the place. She looks suspicious to me." David's stomach dropped. He knew that description. He knew the laptop bag, the professional clothing, the exact way his wife, Ellie, stood after a long day. Ellie. His pen stopped moving. He stared at the notepad as the reality sank in. He was listening to a stranger call his wife suspicious for standing in front of her own home. He couldn't let his voice break, not in this room filled with other dispatchers. He took a deep breath, gripping his pen so tightly the plastic bent. This was no longer a routine call. "Sir," David said, his tone clipped but polite. "I need you to stay calm and explain clearly. You're saying a woman won't let you into the gated entrance of your community?" "That's exactly right." Wallace didn't hesitate. "She's standing there, just refusing to help. She has no right to stop me. I've lived here for over 20 years, and I'm on the Homeowners Association board. She's loitering." The word stung David. Loitering? Ellie spent years building her career, working late nights so they could afford to live in this very neighborhood. She wasn't loitering. She was heading home. "Okay," David said carefully, keeping his emotions locked down. "I'll need you to answer a few questions so I can send the appropriate response. First, are you in immediate danger?" Wallace sighed dramatically. "Well, she's standing right there, isn't she? She's glaring at me like I'm the one causing trouble." Ellie, standing a few feet away, heard every word. Her jaw tightened. She let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. Unbelievable. She looked toward the gate camera overhead, at least knowing that everything was being recorded. "Sir," David pressed, his voice steady. "Has she threatened you in any way?" There was a pause. Then Wallace answered. "Not with words, no, but her attitude is threatening enough." David heard that pause, the subtle shift when exaggeration tried to dress itself up as fact. He marked it down in his notes, but kept his tone neutral. "Understood. Officers will be dispatched to your location. Please remain where you are." "Thank you," finally. Wallace sounded almost satisfied. The call ended. David closed his eyes for a half-second, gripping the edge of his desk. Every instinct screamed at him to call Ellie directly, to warn her that officers were already being sent, but he couldn't break protocol. David was never supposed to insert himself personally. Across town, two officers, Officer Carla Diaz and Officer Ben Reed, were dispatched. Their cruiser turned onto the main road, lights flickering as they approached the gated entrance. Inside the dispatch center, David watched their names pop up on his monitor. He tracked every word. His screen displayed the call log. Suspicious female refusing entry. Caller feels unsafe. Ellie, meanwhile, leaned back against her sedan. She had already texted David, "You won't believe what's happening right now." David had replied immediately, "I got the call." She looked at the screen, then back at Wallace, who was pacing, phone still clutched in his hand. "You called 911 because I didn't open the gate?" Ellie said aloud, calm but incredulous. Wallace spun toward her. "I called because you're making me uncomfortable. You think you can stand there and tell me what I can or can't do in my own neighborhood? That's suspicious behavior, and I won't be intimidated. Suspicious for following the same rules you enforce on everyone else." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You've got to be kidding me." Headlights appeared at the edge of the road. The police cruiser rolled up, blue and red lights flickering across the gate. Ellie straightened her posture, setting her laptop bag inside the car. She pulled out her wallet, holding her driver's license between two fingers. Officer Diaz stepped out first, her hand near her holster. Officer Reed followed, flashlight snapping on. Both officers immediately spotted Ellie standing calmly by her sedan and Wallace waving his arm. "There she is," Wallace shouted. "That's the woman I called about. She refused to let me into my neighborhood." "Evening, officers," Ellie said evenly. "Name's Ellie Vance. I live right here in Whispering Pines. I'm just coming home from work." Officer Diaz's eyes flicked from Ellie to Wallace, then back. "Ma'am, we'll need to check that out. Just stay right there." Inside the dispatch center, David's headset crackled with the officer's radio check-in. Ellie's calm voice filtered through the system. Clear, steady, unmistakable. David's pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the desk. "Oh God, it really is her," he muttered, barely audible. Wallace stepped closer to the officers, eager to state his case. "I've been a homeowner here for decades. I lost my card tonight, and he pointed toward Ellie, refused to let me in. She was rude, dismissive, and she's been loitering here instead of helping." Ellie's tone stayed even. "With all respect, officer, I wasn't loitering. I was going home. He asked me to break Homeowners Association rules and open the gate without identification. I said no. That's all that happened." Officer Reed tilted his flashlight downward, scanning Ellie's professional attire, her vehicle, and her ID. He caught the tension in her jaw, but also the restraint in her body language. He glanced at Diaz, then back at Wallace. "Sir," Reed asked, "you said she threatened you?" Wallace hesitated. "Well, not exactly, but her presence was intimidating." Ellie let out a breath, shaking her head. "Presence. That's what this is about." She held her ID out, extending her arm. Look, you can check my address. It's on Amberwood Drive, 3 blocks from here. Diaz took the license, shining her flashlight across it. It checks out. Wallace's face reddened. You're just going to take her word for it? Ellie gave a small, tired laugh. It's not my word. It's a state-issued ID. The tension cracked the air like static. David, back at the dispatch center, couldn't stop himself from typing a quiet note into the system. Caller statement inconsistent. Subject cooperative, produced ID immediately. Diaz walked a few steps toward Wallace. Sir, did she ever touch you, block your path physically, or make verbal threats? No, but, Wallace began. Then what exactly did she do? Diaz pressed. Wallace's lips quivered. The authority he'd carried minutes ago began to waver. She just wouldn't let me in. She looked at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. Isn't that enough? Reed lowered his flashlight. That's not grounds for an emergency call, sir. Ellie exhaled slowly, though the frustration burned hotter underneath the relief. All this because I said no. Wallace's mouth opened, but no words came out. His certainty had begun to fray. As the officers conferred, neighbors began to gather. Porch lights flickered on, and a few curious faces peeked from doorways. Whispering Pines wasn't known for late-night drama, and now it had arrived at its front gate. The example it sets is simple, Ellie said, turning to Wallace. You don't get to call the police every time someone doesn't do what you want. You can't just let her walk away. Wallace clutched his phone tighter. What kind of example does that set? People like her. He stopped himself, but the words hung heavy in the night air. Ellie caught it. So did the officers, and so did every neighbor within earshot. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. People like me? Ellie turned toward him, her face set in stone. You mean homeowners? Professionals? Or do you mean something else? Wallace stammered, his confidence faltering. That's not what I... Yes, it is. Ellie interrupted softly, her voice cutting through his excuse. That's exactly what you meant. Diaz looked at Wallace for a long moment. Sir, calling 911 is a serious matter. We are not here to settle homeowners association disputes or enforce neighborhood favoritism. If this continues, you could be cited for misuse of emergency services. Wallace's eyes widened, as if the ground beneath him had tilted. Cited for trying to protect myself? Reed stepped closer. Misusing 911 is another thing. These calls take officers away from real emergencies, domestic violence, medical crises, accidents. Lives could be at risk elsewhere while we're standing here because of a lost gate card. The weight of the officer's words settled in the air. A neighbor filming shook his head. Wallace's face flushed deep red. His homeowners association authority seemed paper-thin under the glare of flashing lights and neighborhood stares. Ellie adjusted her stance. A phone call to security would have solved everything. This didn't have to go this far. Diaz radioed in. Subject produced valid ID, residence confirmed. No threat observed. Caller claims intimidation but provides no evidence of criminal activity. Mr. Thompson, Diaz said. You're free to go? Ma'am, you're free to go. Ellie took her ID, sliding it into her wallet, but her eyes stayed locked on Wallace. I don't need an apology, Mr. Thompson, but I need you to understand what you did. You escalated a minor inconvenience into a police matter because you didn't like being told no. Wallace wanted to argue, but every eye was on him. Every phone was recording. One woman from the back of the crowd, someone Ellie recognized from homeowners association meetings, spoke up. Wallace, you've written letters about enforcing rules. You find us over lawn lengths. How can you call 911 asking someone to break those same rules? Ellie finally turned toward her car door. Before climbing in, she looked back once more. Next time you want help, ask like a neighbor, not like an accuser. David, listening at the dispatch center, felt a wave of pride and relief. Ellie had spoken the truth without losing her composure. The officers began to disperse the crowd. Wallace stood frozen, his authority now shattered glass. Reed offered him one last word. Sir, think carefully before you use 911 again. If it's not a real emergency, there are consequences. Ellie climbed into her sedan and pulled forward through the gate toward Amberwood Drive. At the dispatch center, David removed his headset, his palms slick with sweat. He stared at the screen, replaying every second. He knew this incident was a mirror of a deeper issue waiting for moments like this to roar out. By the next morning, the first videos appeared on social media. One clip showed Wallace shouting people like her, before the crowd's murmurs drowned him out. The comments poured in, quickly creating a narrative of homeowners association overreach and weaponized racial assumptions. Ellie sat at her kitchen table, coffee steaming, scrolling through the posts. David sat across from her. This is going to spread, David whispered. Maybe that's the point, Ellie shrugged. Maybe people need to see it. The fallout was swift. An emergency homeowners association group chat demanded Wallace's resignation. His emails from the Homeowners Association president were blunt. A week later, Wallace's resignation arrived in a quiet, two-sentence email. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from the Homeowners Association board. I no longer wish to serve in this role. No apology. No explanation. Just an ending. Ellie and David sat on their porch one evening. You did everything right, David said softly. You kept calm. You didn't escalate. You showed him who he is without losing yourself. And yet it still came down to me proving I belong. Ellie gave a tired smile. ID out, story ready, composure on display. Like living in my own house isn't proof enough. David squeezed her hand. The lesson here isn't about winning against him. It's about showing our daughter how to stand with dignity even when you're being dragged through the mud. The most profound realization came later for David during a shift. A colleague admitted, if it were me on the line, I might have believed the caller at first. Seeing the truth play out, it was eye-opening. That night, David looked at Ellie. It scares me how one phone call can shape everything. Ellie rested her head against his shoulder. And that's why we have to live in a way that tells our story before anyone else can. That night didn't define us. How we handled it did. The judgment without understanding had led to harm, but the greatest act of strength was refusing to let someone else's prejudice dictate who they were. The community had seen it all. Dignity was louder than accusation, and the truth, when held firmly, always surfaced.